Here's my drill. Baseball game last night. I saw the greatest sport in the world. Yeah, unbelievable. One of the greatest. After the operating object, let's see baseball. Yeah, exactly. Bottom of the night, we're down 2-1. Hey, Mario. What would indicate which team? Look, you can't sit there. You can't sit there and George Bush behind five. That doesn't work.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. The chairman is in a good mood this morning. I'm Marc Lanesman, chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the 174th meeting of the National Council on the Arts is now in session. I'd like to welcome everyone this morning, council members, NEA staff, colleagues here in person, and everyone watching online at arts.gov. I'd like to begin with a small announcement. I received a text this morning from Congressman Jim Moran of Virginia, former chairman and now ranking member of the House Interior Appropriations Committee, our funder. His note: "Congratulations, my friend. What a game. Worth every moment of lost sleep. And the hometownie is the hero." So on that note, we will continue with our public meeting. For the record, the council members who are present are founder and producing artistic director of the Shakespeare Festival, LA, Ben Donnenberg from Los Angeles, California. Where's Ben? There he is. Musician Lee Greenwood from Nashville, Tennessee. Arts consultant Joan Israelite from Kansas City, Missouri. Arts patron Charlotte Kessler, there she is, from Columbus, Ohio. Musician, band leader, and composer Irvin Mayfield from New Orleans, Louisiana. Civic leader Stephen Porter from Washington, D.C., who will be joining us by phone. Artist Barbara Ernst Prey from Oyster Bay, New York, wearing red today, she said, in my honor, which I really appreciate. TV and motion picture producer Frank Price from Los Angeles, California. We also have a brand new member of the National Council on the Arts, Aaron Dworkin. Aaron is the founder and president of the Sphinx organization, which is dedicated to increasing the participation of Black and Latino Americans in music schools as professional musicians and as audiences for classical music. Aaron is an accomplished electric and acoustic violinist who received his bachelor's and master's of music in violin performance from the University of Michigan's School of Music. Aaron was named a 2005 MacArthur Fellow and received the Detroit Symphony's 2007 Lifetime Achievement Award. A little young for a Lifetime Achievement Award, yes? It's a little scary. Aaron is a passionate advocate for excellence in music education and diversity in performing arts, who has been asked to be a keynote speaker at numerous national conferences, including the Aspen Ideas Conference, the League of American Orchestras, and Americans for the Arts. Aaron serves on the board of the League of American Orchestras, the Rachel Barton Pine Foundation, WRCJ 90.9 Detroit Classical and Jazz Radio, and the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. Aaron, and there's a connection with Mario there, I think, that I hope you're not responsible for taking Mario away from us. Aaron is also an author who wrote an autobiographical poetry collection, They Said I Wasn't Really Black, as well as a children's book, The First Adventure of Chili Peppers. And most recently, Aaron just released a memoir titled, and get this, Uncommon Rhythm, a Black, White, Jewish, Jehovah's Witness, Irish Catholic adoptee's journey into leadership. I now have the pleasure of administering your oath of office. Aaron, would you please stand, raise your right hand, and repeat after me? I, Aaron Paul Dworkin.
I, Aaron Paul Dworkin.
So far, so good. Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Ladies and gentlemen, please officially welcome the newest member of the National Council of the Arts, Aaron Dworkin. Aaron, anything you'd like to say?
Usually I'm very verbose, but no, thank you, and thank you for your leadership. And it is obviously an honor, and I'm very excited to serve with this important body and to hopefully bring a voice to the role that arts play in our overall society. So, thank you very much.
I think it's the briefest you've ever been, as far as I know. Oh, thanks, Aaron. Okay, back to business. I would like to note for the record that we regret that Jim Ballinger, Miguel Campaneria, Brett Lott, and Joanne Folletta could not participate in today's meeting. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March Council meeting? Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Now we'll move to the council members' votes and their application and guidelines review. I would like to invite our Deputy Chairman for Programs and Partnership, Patrice Walker-Powell, to take us through this section of the meeting. Patrice.
Thank you, Rocco. First, let me welcome our staff, our visiting guests, and our esteemed council members. Please indulge me for about 5 minutes while we make sure that we transact our essential business. In moving to the application and review and our guidelines review sections of the agenda, we have moved this section from its usual placement, usually at the end of today's agenda, to the beginning, as Council Member Stephen Porter is unable to be here but has agreed to join us for the vote by teleconference. The tally of the votes will be announced at the end of today's session. This morning, the Council will be voting by ballot on more than 860 grant recommendations, totaling more than $24.5 million in 3 funding areas: artworks, leadership initiatives, and literature fellowships. These funding recommendations are found behind the corresponding tabs in your council book. Please find your ballots in the folders at your place at the table. In order for your vote to be tallied, you must be present or engaged by telephone, thank you, Mr. Porter, at the time of the motion, discussion, and vote. Council members' affiliations have been recorded in the council book and on your ballots, and each member has been provided with an opportunity to update this information prior to the meeting. Before voting, council members should review the list of recommendations and rejections and add to the list provided in your folders any affiliations that may be missing. Council members are recorded as not voting on any application with which they are affiliated. This list becomes part of the agency's official record. After brief summaries of the 4 funding areas, council members will have an opportunity to ask questions and/or discuss recommendations before voting on the ballot. After you have completed your ballot, staff will collect your folders and tally the votes. May I have a motion to consider the recommended grants and rejections under the artworks, leadership, and fellowship tabs in your council books? Thank you. Second? Thank you. Now I will summarize the 3 funding areas on which you will be voting, pause for any comments or questions from council members, and then ask you to mark your ballots for each category. The new artworks category combines and replaces 2 previously distinct funding opportunities: access to artistic excellence and learning in the arts for children and youth. Artworks is the agency's primary category of funding for all arts disciplines. This category encourages and supports the following 4 outcomes: creation, the creation of art that meets the highest standards of excellence; engagement, public engagement with diverse and excellent art; learning, lifelong learning in the arts; and finally, livability, the strengthening of communities through the arts. These recommended grants are the first group of applications in this category brought to the Council for this fiscal year. As a reminder, the second half will be considered in March next year. Using rounded figures, in March of 2011, the agency received 1,686 eligible applications requesting more than $84 million in fiscal year 2012 support. Recommended for the Council's approval are 823 projects totaling up to $21,543,000. Grants are recommended to 49% of all applicants, with amounts ranging from $5,000 to $100,000. Recommended projects spanned 15 disciplines and fields and focus primarily on the creation of work and presentation of both new and existing works to American audiences. Creation and presentation take shape in the form of commissions, collaborations, original productions, exhibitions, performances, tours, film festivals, artist residencies, literary publications, art in public places, and services to the field. Direct grants are recommended to 47 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. Are there any comments or questions from the Council? If not, please mark your ballots. Leadership initiatives support a variety of projects of national and field-wide significance. At this meeting, the Council is requested to approve funding for 3 projects in 3 arts disciplines or fields, totaling more than $1,097,000. Continuing support is requested for Shakespeare in American Communities, Shakespeare for a New Generation, which will bring performances and educational activities to middle school and high school students across the United States. Art Place, a collaboration of national foundations, the Arts Endowment, and multiple federal agencies to promote arts and culture as the pillar of creative placemaking in communities across the country. And finally, National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Awards, which honor and bring attention to model programs that celebrate the creativity of America's young people and provide them learning opportunities. Are there any questions or comments from the Council? If not, please mark your ballots. Next, literature fellowships provide writers with the time and means to create new work. Fellowships of $25,000 are offered to creative writers in poetry and prose in alternating years. This year, 1,179 eligible applications were reviewed by panelists who recommend 40 grants for prose writers from 20 states and the District of Columbia, totaling $1 million. Are there any comments or questions from the Council? If not, please mark your ballots. Finally, there are several projects under the Awards tab in your Council book. These grants have been awarded under the Chairman's delegated authority and are brought to the Council's attention at this meeting, but no vote is necessary. Included are 7 Chairman's Extraordinary Action Grants of up to $25,000 or less, totaling $235,215. They include the Knight NEA Community Arts Journalism Challenge Awards, 131 Arts Education in American Communities Program Awards, under the Chairman's Small Grant Authority, totaling $1,310,000. Also, 3 interagency agreements totaling $227,500, and 2 20% amendments totaling $15,000. Thank you. Guideline review and voting. At this meeting, the Council is asked to consider 4 sets of guidelines. Literature fellowships in the field of poetry for fiscal year 2013, National Accessibility Awards for fiscal year 2012, Our Town for fiscal year 2012, and finally, grants for arts projects for fiscal year 2013. I will now turn to Jillian Miller, our Director of Office of Guidelines and Panel Operations, to summarize the guidelines up for a vote at this meeting.
Good morning. At this meeting, you're reviewing 4 sets of guidelines, all of which contain updates to existing categories. Your first set of guidelines is for Literature Fellowships Poetry, and that begins on page 3 of your Guidelines tab. These guidelines describe the agency's support for fellowships to published creative writers that allow the recipients to set aside time for writing, research, and other career advancement. And there's only one change to highlight for you here. Applicants can now establish their eligibility entirely with digital, audio, or online publications. Hard copy publications are no longer required. Your next set of guidelines is for the National Accessibility Award, and that begins on page 8 of your Guidelines tab. These guidelines support projects that make the arts accessible to individuals with disabilities or older adults. And there's only one change to highlight here as well. This category will now accept projects that are emerging in addition to those that are established. The next set of guidelines is for Our Town, and that's on page 12 of your Guidelines tab. These guidelines are for creative placemaking projects that contribute to the livability of communities and place the arts at their core. The changes here are based on our 1 year of experience with these guidelines. So we're clarifying several things, such as the required partnership between a nonprofit organization and a local government that will lead the project. We're also being more clear about what we mean by local when we say local government. And we've clarified the project examples and review criteria. In addition, the maximum grant amount is now $150,000, and projects may last up to 2 years. We're also putting in place some restrictions on applications. We'll only accept one application per geographically represented area to clarify the relationship between cities and counties. Previous Our Town grantees and their partners won't be allowed to apply for 1 year to allow for more equitable distribution of grants. And Mayor's Institute on City Design 25th Anniversary Initiative grantees will be required to have completed those grants before an Our Town grant can be awarded. And your last set of guidelines is grants for arts projects, and that begins on page 22. For most of our applicants, these guidelines represent the full range of funding opportunities for the entire year. They offer support through 2 categories, Artworks and Challenge America Fast Track. Last year, we made significant changes to these guidelines to incorporate our new strategic plan. This year, we're simply making some adjustments in the Artworks category. In the design discipline, all applicants will now apply to the August deadline. This will allow us to distribute the workload more evenly across the year for the design staff. In media arts, we're incorporating the arts and media category into Artworks, and the types of projects supported in the past under both categories will continue to be eligible. This will allow us to eliminate the need for separate categories with separate processes. Next, the musical theater and theater disciplines have merged into a single discipline called theater and musical theater. This is in recognition of the fact that many theaters present seasons of plays of both musicals and non-musical plays, that plays are incorporating music in ways previously not thought of as musicals, and it allows us to consider applications under a single set of deadlines and panels. And finally, consortium applications, which have been an exception to the 1 application per year rule, have been eliminated. With reduced resources, the agency can no longer consider multiple applications from or multiple grants to a single organization in the Artworks category.
Thank you, Jillian, for that concise presentation. Are there any comments or questions from council members? If not, may I have a motion to approve the guidelines? So motion. And a second? Second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections? Any abstentions? Thank you all.
Thank you, Patrice. Now I'd like to give a brief overview of my travels since the June meeting of the National Council. In July, Proctor's Theater in Schenectady, New York, hosted the annual conference for the League of Historic American Theaters. Their theme was Creating the Future, which they described as follows. For more than 3 decades, League members and their historic theaters have been at the forefront in stimulating downtown redevelopment, building community identity and heritage, promoting pride of place, and anchoring creative communities. Despite challenges from an ongoing global recession, enterprising League members are taking control of their futures, pushing ahead with plans for expanding their facilities, programming, and operations. That sounds almost like a verbatim page out of our creative placemaking playbook. And Proctor's itself is a great example of a theater that embeds itself in its community. It has a mix of programming that includes theater, music, dance, performance, art exhibitions, chess tournaments, and farmers markets, which together attract a broad swath of New York's capital region to downtown Schenectady. That foot traffic, that influx of new people needing places to eat and shop and visit along the way, is what drove the revitalization of Schenectady. Following that, I met Representative Louise Slaughter for events in Rochester and Buffalo, New York. I was sorry not to overlap with Joanne Folletta while I was there, but I had a great introduction to the arts community in those 2 cities. Following my time with Congresswoman Slaughter, I was invited to give an address at the Chautauqua Summer Arts Program. I gave a 3-part talk that celebrated failure, one of my favorite themes, elevated the role of the audience within arts organizations, and outlined the importance of place. These are 3 themes that I've addressed repeatedly at the MCA in Chicago, at a graduation ceremony in Pittsburgh, at Arena Stage here in D.C. I think they're worth revisiting, so you'll hear me talking about all 3 in the coming months. In August, I visited Peoria again at the invitation of Congressman Aaron Schock. We spent time at the Peoria Art Guild, the construction site for the new home of the Riverfront Museum, and the Peoria Ballet, where they were rehearsing a song called God Bless America. God Bless the USA, excuse me. Now, did I get it exactly right? God Bless the USA. God Bless America is a little different song. Yes, I was going to say you'd have to be a little older. But it was quite a neat moment to look up and see the ballet dancers rehearsing that song for a performance they were going to do, and it made me feel like there was a kind of full circle. I also got to catch up with my old friends Kathy Chitwood and Suzette Boulay. Following Peoria, I headed up to Alaska as part of a delegation hosted by the Rasmussen Foundation that is an annual event designed to introduce people to the real Alaska, which is a far different place from the pictures of polar bears and igloos that you see on calendars and postcards. People are living in extreme poverty and confronting serious depression, substance abuse, and other mental and physical health issues. There's also real beauty, both natural and that produced by artists. I was able to visit Sitka, Alaska, which is a town of 7,000 people, reachable only by seaplane, that was one of our inaugural Our Town grantees. Following Alaska, I was off to Minneapolis for the opening of the Coles Center for Dance. I was able to spend some time with the Hennepin Theater Trust, which is also an Our Town grantee. They put together a public discussion around creative placemaking that included Mayor Ryback. He is yet another public official who totally gets it about the arts, a true arts mayor. I also spent some time visiting the James Sewell Ballet at the invitation of Representative Betty McCollum. Later in September, I took a week-long tour of what I called the Sea Cities: Charleston, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. I was in Charleston for the latest installment of our Mayor's Institute on City Design and to tour the Our Town grant there with Mayor Riley, who is really the godfather of creative placemaking. In Cincinnati, we started by driving out to Hamilton, Ohio, which has an Our Town grant for their work with Art Space in revitalizing an abandoned store in the middle of their downtown. There will be artist housing alongside a sculpture park. Following that, I was off to Columbus, Ohio, hosted by Charlotte Kessler. Charlotte, I wonder if you'd say a few words about our time there.
It was a wonderful wet day. We had a fabulous walking tour planned, which we decided to do by car. We met first thing with the Greater Columbus Arts Council, and they assembled a group that had received an Our Town grant, and I think Rocco was especially taken with the parking lot sheds that are going to become objects of art. They have people recreate, and this will be in celebration of Columbus's bicentennial. That afternoon, we had a panel that was held at the Wexner Center. Julie Hanahan, who is chairman of the Ohio Arts Council, was the moderator. The participants were Rocco, Leslie Wexner, who's CEO of Limited Brands, our mayor, Michael Coleman, Doug Kreidler, who is CEO of chairman of the Columbus Foundation, and who am I missing? Oh, Rocco, the mayor. That's it, our four, and Julie. So at any rate, I said I was determined to beat Joan's attendance in Kansas City, which I think she turned out 1,000 people. I was very excited. We had 1,300 registrants. It rained. It was free. So we had, I think, 900 in attendance. It was a good discussion. Yeah, so it was a nice day. So we enjoyed having you in Columbus.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm off script here, but to me that's a perfect example, parking lot sheds, something that's in every city that you look out your window and you see all the time. Why not make them aesthetic? Why not, intersect the arts with everybody's daily life with public expressions like that? And I think that's a perfect example of what we're talking about with our town. But thanks, Charlotte. And after Columbus, it was up to Cleveland, where I went on an amazing tour of 3 different arts districts. I was very impressed with the amount and quality of theater, which is always something I notice first and foremost, in Cleveland, from the Cleveland Public Theater to Playhouse Square. And then finally, at the beginning of this month, I was in Australia for the International Federation of Arts Councils and Culture Agencies World Summit on Art and Culture. Sounds very grand. Melbourne is a long way away, but it was worth it. More than 70 countries were represented by over 500 delegates. I participated on a panel about placemaking with a colleague who works with artists and poor communities in India, and one who works in rural Western Alaska. Australia. I've already been to Alaska. In all of that travel, the one real regret I have was not being able to make it to Kansas City for the opening of the Kaufman Center. The NEA was represented there, however, both by our Deputy Chairman, Patrice Walker-Powell, and by our own council member, Joan Israelite, who has played such an important role with the Kaufman Center. Joan, I wonder if you might say a few words about that.
Thank you, Rocco. Yes, after 14 years of planning, the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts had its grand opening on September 16th, and Moshe Safdie is the architect for this $413 million project, and Yasu Toyota, the acoustician. The opening itself on Friday night in the theater component, we had Placido Domingo, Canadian Brass, Patti LuPone, Tommy Tune, and others. And Patrice was there with me that evening. On Saturday night, it was the dedication of the concert hall, and Yitzhak Perlman, Diana Krall, and others were there for that celebration, including Bobby Watson in the jazz group from Kansas City. And Sunday perhaps was the most interesting because it was the free day for the entire community, with performances happening by local groups in both halls all afternoon. And 55,000 people actually entered the building to see it. We know that there were thousands more who decided not to wait in line for 2 hours in the rain to get in the building. And so it was quite an expression of support for this wonderful new facility. So I invite you all to come to Kansas City to see this wonderful new performing arts center. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. I'd now like to give you an update on the NEA support of arts journalism, which is something very near and dear to me. As some of you know, I was trained at the Yale School of Drama as a drama critic, so this is a topic that is especially important and personal to me. When I arrived at the NEA, we inherited 3 arts journalism institutes that focused on classical music, dance, and theater that were run in partnership with Columbia University, Duke, and USC. These institutes had been designed in response to a growing trend at newspapers. Arts reporters and critics' jobs were disappearing, and their work was being absorbed either by other generalist reporters or by freelancers. The institutes were designed to increase the quality of arts journalism being written in this country. Reporters and freelancers would come to the university, see a week of performances, write about them, and have their work critiqued by experts and peers. A lot of stellar folks came through the Arts Journalism Institutes, and the institutes did a great job of recruiting reporters across all forms of media. However, the world is changing. It's not just full-time jobs for arts journalism that are disappearing. Coverage is disappearing as well. Well, certain coverage. We took a look around, and we quickly realized that arts coverage comes in 5 basic flavors. 1, there's strictly factual information about the arts. You know, the performance starts at 7. The gallery is located at 123 Main Street. Things like that. 2, casual discourse. I really like the show. Have you seen the new symphony yet? Run out and get tickets now. That kind of discussion. 3, news coverage and investigative reporting. The story of repatriated cultural property, for instance, or the coverage of the recent report from the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. 4, criticism. Trained professionals placing work in both a historic and a current context. And 5, academic writing. We then realized that 3 of those were actually flourishing. With the internet and social media, arts organizations are able to push out the factual information about themselves much more than they've ever been able to do before. Facebook, Twitter, and blogs have certainly increased the amount of casual discourse about the arts, creating virtual communities of arts lovers who share their reactions to what they are seeing. Interestingly, the opera fans tend to be the most active and prolific in this arena. And finally, academic writing is soaring. If you look at the SNAAP data that have come out, we see a big increase in the number of MFAs and arts PhDs. So it is really two kinds of arts discourse, numbers 3 and 4, arts news and arts criticism, that are in crisis. So at the NEA, we spent some time thinking about how a new arts journalism program might look, and quickly realized that we could articulate the problem very well, but we had no idea what the solution might look like. So we turned to the Knight Foundation. Knight, as a foundation, was committed to arts and committed to journalism, so we thought they were a natural partner to take on arts journalism naturally. In fact, Knight had earlier supported some of the same arts journalism institutes that the NEA had supported. Knight has consistently had success with crowdsourcing and relying on the creativity that exists in communities. So we partnered to put out a call to the 8 Knight resident communities, where we articulated the problem we hope to address and asked those communities for their best thinking and creativity. We also partnered with the local arts agencies in those 8 communities to make sure that we're reaching out both broadly and deeply. At the beginning of this month, we announced the 5 winners, and I would love to share their ideas with you. Would you please roll the video?
The NEA Community Arts Journalism Challenge turned to 8 communities to ask for their best thinking. 233 organizations, individuals, and businesses came forward with solutions. By unanimous decision, 5 of these ideas were thought to hold particular promise. Charlotte, North Carolina has a vibrant arts community, but unfortunately, Charlotte's art coverage has not been able to keep pace. So the community's major media players will combine forces with the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, to create the Charlotte Arts Alliance, a coalition that will train aspiring and seasoned arts journalists and provide arts coverage through broadcast, print, and online outlets. The reporters trained by the Alliance would be equipped to cover the myriad of arts avenues in Charlotte, and all of the content would be free for any of the Alliance's outlets who want to run it. The Alliance's online app will aggregate all of this coverage in a single place, helping to ensure that the future of arts journalism in Charlotte will be just as vibrant as the city's art scene. Detroit, Michigan has a growing creative community, but local media has not kept up with this artistic growth, and Detroit lacks a robust dialogue around its local culture. In order to connect the contributors of its vibrant art scene with one another and with the population at large, Jennifer Conlon and her partner Dan Shaw will bring an interactive mobile video booth called iCritic to the Motor City. iCritic will physically crisscross Detroit so that ordinary citizens, as well as arts aficionados and aspiring critics, will be able to record video reviews as they are leaving performances, readings, and exhibitions all around Detroit. These reviews will be made instantly available to the public on all types of social media. iCritic will lend legitimacy to emerging arts organizations while attracting new audiences for well-established ones, and will help Detroit's creative community continue to grow. Miami's one-of-a-kind art scene has enjoyed explosive growth and international attention. To ensure that the growing number of arts events in the community is covered, Creative Ed, Mosaic of Art, and the Miami Herald will team up with WLRN to create Art Spot Miami. Building on the success of crowd financing sites like Kickstarter and Spot.us, Art Spot Miami will allow journalists to pitch art story ideas directly to the public. When their fundraising needs have been met, the journalists will team up with WLRN and the Miami Herald to produce the event. Art Spot Miami is built on the belief that arts journalism must reinvent itself to survive. This model seeks to do just that by engaging the public and helping to select which stories will be covered in their local media. In a bid to dramatically increase the amount of arts coverage in Philadelphia, Drexel University, publisher of 2 highly regarded arts and culture journals, will embed arts journalists who will be paid to provide arts coverage for the Philadelphia Daily News. The Daily News has a high circulation, but a limited amount of arts-related content due to budgetary and staffing concerns. Meanwhile, Drexel University publishes significant arts coverage online and is interested in finding a larger audience for its trained cadre of student, faculty, freelance arts writers. This idea would curate stories by editorial teams from both Drexel and the Daily News, eliminating the need for either to hire additional full-time staff. By leveraging existing resources for both partners, this idea will benefit everyone involved, especially daily news readers, who will have a better understanding of what the arts of Philadelphia are all about. San Jose is home to a booming, tech-driven economy, but its arts economy has not kept up. The Bay Area Citizen and its partners will launch a 3-part arts journalism program to encourage a better understanding of how art works in San Jose. The first initiative will conduct a map-based design strategy aimed at raising awareness of what arts institutions and startups are doing in the city, how they are connected, and where potential hubs might exist. An app plan will build on the map by enabling people to interact with the venues featured on the map. A series of journalistic stories will then be incorporated into the program that will investigate what the map and app reveal about the arts ecology of the area, and what cultural funding strategies might best be employed to ensure its healthy future. These winning ideas answer the challenge by effectively rethinking arts journalism, and if successful, could serve as effective models for other communities across the nation.
I would now like to ask Bill O'Brien, our Senior Advisor for Program Innovation, who is our lead on this project, to join us at the table. And I would love to open this up for any questions or comments from the council members. The floor is yours.
Okay. As you see, the computer animated video that we put together was meant to illustrate the ideas. At this point, they're very much in an idea stage. And what we'll do now going forward is these 5 ideas will be funded to develop an idea to action plan. And they will be delivered by November 30th. And then we'll review those plans and decide whether or not they've been developed to the point where they would be worthy of further investment for implementation. So the idea to action plans are up to $20,000 in support, and for any of those ideas that are chosen for further support, they'll be provided with another $80,000 of implementation funding. But would love to hear any thoughts, ideas, questions that you might have on any of the ideas that you've seen. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, I'm wondering if part of the idea to action plan will be sustainability beyond our funding.
Yes. Sustainability is one of the core values that will be looked at. And you can see a couple of the plans, or a couple of the ideas really were all about how do we create new types of revenue, particularly ArtSpot Miami, which is sort of a crowdsourced funding type thing where the professional writers don't pitch stories to editors, they pitch them straight to the audience to see which kinds of stories people are interested in having developed. And in the Bay Citizen, that's a very large nonprofit journalism institution, and that project is a 3-tiered strategy to understand what the funding ecosystem in the Bay Area is all about and how they can develop stories to help the community better understand how they might support the arts that's around them.
Will there be paid advertising components to these, do you think?
There's a consultant that's been hired to help develop the business plans or the idea to action plans. There is, I think at this point, a lot of exploration on different types of revenue streams. Some of them are nonprofit, some of them are for-profit. In some cases, they're going to be amortizing the ability to fund the development of the content across universities and across legacy journalism institutions. But yes, absolutely, I think they're going to be looking at how, especially when they get into new technology platforms, how they can start to bring advertising back into the sort of foundation of how things are funded. Yes.
Bill, what is the plan to share the results of these projects?
That's a good question. The idea to action plans are designed to be shared. So all 5 of these are going to be shared broadly. We've already had some conversations to help disseminate the information out. We unveiled these at the Grantmakers in the Arts, which is a convening where people who invest in communities all across the country were able to get an early glimpse of what we're seeing. We've told them that we'll be sharing the idea to action plans with anybody who'd like to see them. We've also been in contact with the previous Journalism Institute directors who've been observing this as we go along. They've developed a network through our support over the past that we'd like to keep invigorated. So at every stage, we're going to be sharing these prototypes. I think a big value at the core of this is that we all want to learn from what happens, both in the development of the ideas through the idea to action plan and also through the implementation. So everybody who applied, when they looked at the application, they were aware that their ideas were going to be shared broadly and that this was meant to be an exercise in investigating and experimenting with things that hopefully will be emulated in other places if they prove to have value.
Part of my concern is the quality of the product at the end of the day. If we're talking about arts journalism, we really want people to be competent and be connoisseurs of the art. That's the way that the art grows. Just having general discourse or general opinions is just kind of a magnification of what folks do on the internet now in the blog world. And I would hope that we're all about elevating the art, supporting the greatness of American arts, and that the end product here gets us to that.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the most fascinating questions at the core of this. And it certainly, in the application itself, the challenge was to reinvigorate or revitalize or invent effective ways to promote quality cultural content and criticism across a targeted community. The whole notion of how a citizen journalist or a pro-am type of population participates in this, I think, was one of the most fascinating topics throughout, both reading all of the 233 applications and also in the conversations when the panel convened in Miami to look at all of these. And I think if you aggregate a lot of new ideas right now today around how we think about journalism now and in the future, there has to be some way of looking at how there may be some pro-am involvement in that. And I think when you look at these 5 ideas, there's a varying degree of how involved they might be. Probably the most central, or the idea that has pro-am most central to its whole strategy, is the iCritic idea from Detroit. And when that was reviewed, for example, the panel did take some comfort in knowing that Jennifer Conlon and Dan Shaw, the 2 people who forwarded the idea, are arts editors and arts contents writers for the New York Times, and they had sort of framed out that they will be curating these conversations, both by choosing where the van goes and who's going to get involved in the conversation, and also providing some sort of framework for people to be able to respond to questions that have some kind of professional criticism foundation in place. But they were in San Francisco at the Grantmakers in the Arts Conference. They were also quick to defend the idea that, especially in Detroit right now, where you have a creative community sort of reinvigorating this city, the people who are coming in and helping to redefine what arts are in Detroit are some of the people they want to hear from. And ultimately, having them documenting what they're doing while they're doing it in the end could be very interesting.
Bill, over here.
Yes.
Are there plans for another round of funding once this initial one is completed?
There's no plan really in place at this point. This was a bit of an act of faith, really, a response to allow everyone to respond to a challenge, and we didn't know what we'd see. We were actually very surprised that we had that many applications that came back. I think at this point, we'll be sharing very broadly with everybody who's interested in the arts journalism sector the evaluation of the idea to action plans, watching the prototypes develop. Our hope is that there are some successful ideas that come out of this and that people can emulate them with or without our support. But we'll be thinking very carefully about how we can most effectively leverage our resources in a way that keeps these ideas moving forward.
I love the impulse and I love the initiative, and I think it's a great thing. I can't imagine how you can have a flourishing arts arena without informed and vibrant and engaged criticism. Criticism has always been important toward the development of the art. But I do want to echo the question that Irvin raised, and Aaron did yesterday in our session as well. That I do think the whole concept is that you're trying to preserve some form of real expertise, of real knowledge that you're bringing to the table that isn't necessarily shared by the populace at large. And we do tend to think of the arts that everybody has their opinion. It's a democracy; everybody's entitled to their opinion. But there are experts in this field too. One of my favorite lines, and those of you around the table have probably heard me quote this too often, but it's so wonderful. S.J. Perlman once said, "I don't know much about medicine, but I know what I like." And it's a little bit like that with the arts. Everyone feels they have a valid opinion, which isn't necessarily valid, and we need to make sure that the quality is maintained here at a high level. So I think that's key. Joan.
One of the most interesting things about two of these ideas is the way that they cross boundaries. They aggressively cross boundaries from a commercial newspaper to a public radio station to a university, and two of them have university partners. So they are bringing in the highest level, people who have devoted their entire lifetimes to the study of Shakespeare or to the study of jazz, to the table in a conversation with newspaper reporters and editors, as well as public radio folks, as well as commercial radio folks. So we do not know what this very rich mix is going to produce. We're really excited to see what the results will be. And we're going to see if the folks the scholars from the academic world can really speak in a way that speaks to a general public. You have scholars from Drexel who have studied and they're in depth in their subject, and they're going to be in the Daily News. So all of this is new terrain, and we are enormously excited to see what will happen. And some of these things are going to work, and some of them are going to flop. So we will see.
Other than Detroit, the other four are really looking at both providing a new platform for these professional writers to actually make a living and have a way to reach an audience, and also for people to be trained. So it's sort of looking at the whole push and pull of training, making critics better, giving them a platform and an audience.
To me, that's a critical element of it too. Critics have to be able to make a living applying their craft, which is increasingly challenging, and that's a very important part of this, I think. Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Bill. That was great. Last night, as hopefully everyone knows, there was a baseball game, but the NEA also celebrated the 2011 opera honorees. John Conklin, Reza Stevens, Robert Ward, and Speight Jenkins, who is here with us today. Speight, thanks for coming. You spend 10 minutes with this guy, you see why he's been so successful. Speight is not only an opera honoree, he is also former member of the National Council on the Arts. So this must be something of a deja vu moment for you. Welcome back, Speight. For anyone who was not able to watch yesterday, you may visit arts.gov to see the archive of the live webcast. This morning I wanted to continue the celebration as well as mark the first day of Opera America's National Opera Week. Yesterday we celebrated decades of accomplishment by four giants who've done so much to shape opera as we know it in this country. Today I thought we might look to the future. Opera is a venerable and long-standing art form, and one that from the outside can possibly seem sacred and static. But opera artists and companies have been home to some amazing innovations that should be noted by everyone in the field of performing arts. I asked Wayne Brown, the NEA's Director of Music and Opera, to bring together some leaders in the field who could talk about what an opera needs to remain sacred and unchanged, as well as what should be on the table to be questioned and reconsidered. HD broadcasts have become omnipresent. Opera fans are some of the most active people anywhere on blogs and Twitter. I was even the victim of a pop-up opera flash mob when I spoke at Chautauqua this summer. It was a pretty wild surprise. So let me invite Wayne up to the podium to kick off this panel and introduce our guests. Wayne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Council, agency colleagues, and guests. This week, the Arts Endowment has chosen to celebrate opera in America. We started Wednesday with a special luncheon for the 2011 NEA Opera honorees, continued last evening with the NEA Opera Honors Awards ceremony, and now culminate our focus through today's public meeting. I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge members of the production team that were assembled to make the NEA Opera Honors celebration last night so successful. Thanks to all of you who are here in the audience, and I'd like to ask that you might stand, that the agency might acknowledge you, those who were behind the scenes. Historically speaking, the Council through the years has included notable individuals from the opera field, such as Marian Anderson, Anthony Bliss, Beverly Sills, Giancarlo Menotti, Roberta Peters, Mary Costa, and, of course, 2011 NEA Opera honoree Speight Jenkins. Since 1965, the Arts Endowment has invested in hundreds of commissioning projects, premiere performances, regional tours, and national broadcasts of opera productions. In fact, to date, the agency's investment in the opera discipline is nearly $170 million in the life of the Arts Endowment. One of the agency's earliest grants was to the Metropolitan Opera, which received $63,000 for an initiative in the southeastern states designed to assist with audience development for opera on the local level. Another of the agency's early grants was $40,000 given to the New York City Opera to enable the company to expand its young artists program. Indeed, the opera field, one of the most multidisciplinary art forms, has been a champion of innovation. In recent years, the NEA has launched special initiatives in opera. They include Great American Voices, an initiative through which 24 opera companies participated in residency programs for members of the armed forces and their families at 39 military installations through the United States, including Honolulu, Hawaii. And as you know, in 2007, the Arts Endowment launched a Lifetime Achievement Award, now known to all as the NEA Opera Honors. Over the past 4 years, 17 individuals have become recipients of this national honor, given to those who, through their unique contribution, have helped to advance the art form in our nation. Here today, I am joined by 3 individuals who continue to enrich the canon of opera in America through their unique voices and life's work. They indeed encapsulate this vibrant and innovative art form. We welcome them to today's meeting of the National Council and to the worldwide audience of the Arts Endowment webcast on Ustream. Before our first presenter comes forward, I'd like to say just a word about Marc Scorca. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge his leadership, for the wonderful support that has been given to the Arts Endowment over these past 4 years. The Arts Endowment works in partnership with others to implement our work, and the agency is appreciative to Opera America and its commitment to the NEA Opera Honors and support for opera in America. Marc?
Thank you, Wayne, for those kind words. Success in the arts, as everyone knows, is a team effort, and we're happy to be a partner of the National Endowment for the Arts. I'm delighted to be here this morning to make a brief presentation with two of my important colleagues about the state of the field. But before doing so, I just want to add my thanks to the NEA for the support of the NEA Opera Honors over the last 4 years, and over the last 3 years, the support of National Opera Week, which we conduct in conjunction with the NEA Opera Honors. Over the next week, over 100 opera organizations will deliver free programming to audiences around the country, backstage tours, pop-up operas in unusual locations, and other kinds of participatory activities, just to demonstrate the accessibility and excitement of opera in communities across the country. And we're very grateful to the NEA for making this possible. Opera America was established in 1970 by 17 mid-sized opera companies to encourage increased co-production among them as a means to achieve efficiency and to raise artistic standards. Since then, our programs have grown to provide services in all artistic, managerial, and governance areas. We now have approximately 16,000 institutional and individual members, including virtually every professional opera company, hundreds of universities and conservatories, and businesses that provide essential goods and services to the field. In addition, we serve hundreds of opera company trustees and volunteers and thousands of artists who enjoy the benefit of an array of professional services. Among Opera America's core values is a commitment to the creation and production of American operas. Our effort to stimulate an American opera repertoire represents the epitome of a public-private partnership with the NEA. In the 1970s and early 1980s, no new works were produced by American opera companies, a situation that threatened the validity of the art form in this country. By the mid-1980s, the NEA's New American Works program and Opera America's re-granting programs, funded with contributions from the private sector, began to award grants that offset the financial risk associated with producing new works. By the early 1990s, this investment peaked at a combined $2 million annually for several years. The result was a sea change. Now, dozens of new operas are produced every season. Most American companies offer performances of new or existing operas frequently. Opera America's North American Works Directory lists over 1,000 new works that have been composed and produced over the last 25 years. We now have an American opera repertoire that is performed in opera houses around the world. This would not have happened without the strategic intervention of the NEA. Although the New American Works program was terminated along with the opera music theater program some years ago, the positive impact of the NEA's investment is still being felt. Most recently, Opera America has begun the construction of the first ever National Opera Center in New York City. For the first time, audition, recording, and rehearsal facilities designed specifically for opera will be housed under one roof. It will increase the effectiveness of producing companies that come to New York every year and advance the careers of thousands of singers who until now have had to audition in New York in the worst of conditions. HD cameras and projectors will enable us to stream workshops of new works, auditions, and professional development activities to select audiences around the world. We will open in September of 2012. Despite the struggles of our companies, 2 of 3 key indicators demonstrate the fundamental strength of opera today. Currently, opera is thriving. Artists want to create and perform new works. Opera America's online career guide lists more than 1,000 relevant degree-granting programs across the country. If we take even a modest average of 10 graduates from each program each year, 10,000 new singers, composers, directors, and designers annually declare themselves interested in making opera a central part of their lives. The intensity of their creative ambition is evidenced by the tremendous growth in the number of small opera ensembles in cities across the country, most of which are launched by young artists. In Boston last spring, over a dozen local opera providers were involved in designing our annual conference. Many of these groups don't conform to the familiar model of an established opera company. They perform varied repertoire in unusual venues and are generally free of the constraints of subscription series and administrative overhead. They are spontaneous, innovative, and energetic. Frequently, they attract audiences who don't identify themselves as traditional opera-goers. This new opera landscape is analogous to the artistic variety and vitality of the nonprofit theater and dance communities. It's new to opera. Audience demand for opera is great too, at the right price and for the right program. Several companies I visited recently have had great success selling tickets via Groupon and Living Social. When Virginia Opera promoted performances of Madame Butterfly last spring, 458 tickets were snapped up in Norfolk and 585 in Richmond. The Dallas Opera sold over 900 tickets to Anna Bolena in the 24-hour period they were available. Lines of people snake through the lobby and out into Lincoln Center Plaza waiting for $20 Metropolitan Opera tickets that are available on select weeknights. Houston Grand Opera's performances of the mariachi opera To Cross the Face of the Moon were completely sold out. Only one took place at the Wortham Center. The others were offered at the city's largest Hispanic cultural center. Thousands of people who had never attended an opera and may never attend one at the Wortham Center now think differently about the importance of Houston Grand Opera in their city. That opera, the Mariachi Opera, just enjoyed a great success in a run of performances at the Châtelet Theatre in Paris. And we can't overlook for a second the fact that last season, more than 2 million tickets were sold to the Metropolitan Opera HD transmissions to movie theaters across the nation. There's an appetite for attending opera that is as great as the appetite for creating and producing it, proving opera's validity as a cultural option for contemporary audiences. Yet, in the most recent year documented in our professional opera survey, over 70% of our member companies reported deficits. Yes, the numbers are complicated by the recession, but the fact remains that a significant number of companies today are being forced to question the sustainability of the traditional opera company structure. In several cities, including here in Washington, companies are merging with or considering merging with art centers, arts agencies, dance companies, and even orchestras. It's confusing that when the art form itself is thriving and there is ample evidence of audience enthusiasm, that the core delivery platform, the traditional opera company that has been the basis for the growth of the field over the last 6 decades, is increasingly fragile. Key questions emerge. How do established opera companies continue to bring audiences high-quality performances of a broad repertoire that includes the large and expensive works of the 19th century? How do we continue to nurture new works and smaller companies that add variety and energy to the field? How do we encourage collaboration across the field that promotes effectiveness and creativity? I'm delighted to be joined here today by exemplars of both facets of our field who will explain how they are responding to these questions. But I'll turn the microphone back to Wayne Brown, who will introduce them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And members of the council, hold your questions. As you learned last evening, Speight Jenkins made a decision at an early age to devote his life to the opera field. Well, we are all the beneficiaries of that decision. General Director of Seattle Opera since 1983, Speight is one of the most influential and accomplished general directors in the country. He is a politically active arts advocate and is recognized nationally as a leading authority on opera, as you learned so much through the Opera Honors Award ceremony last evening. His knowledge of opera is reflected in his company's many innovative productions, substantial publications, and comprehensive education programs and services. For more than 3 years, Speight has been an annual guest of the Metropolitan Opera Quiz. We welcome Speight back to this meeting of the National Council, of which he served as a member from 1995 to 2001. Speight?
Thank you so much. I think that I was very interested in Marc's remarks. We're all fighting in opera when we do the standard operas to deal with the tremendous money crisis that has come up in the recession. And I think that there are many different ways of doing it. What I wanted to talk about today is how innovation has helped us at Seattle Opera to maintain a record. 18 of the last 19 years we've balanced our budget, including the last 3 or 4 years, where it's really been a tremendous battle to do so. But there are plenty of ways to do it and still deal with opera and present opera as it has always been presented. We have a very large audience in Seattle, much larger than our area might suggest, because I mentioned this last night, but we're only we're 7th or 8th largest opera company in the country, and we only have a 3.5 million audience from which we pull in our metropolitan area. So it's a very active audience, but the expenses continue to grow. They grow tremendously, and it's something we have to work with. So what we've tried to do is what we're doing is figuring out how to present opera in the most economical fashion, and yet not just do rental productions that always look the same. The first one I would show you, actually we started before the recession, which was a Rigoletto that we did. The first time this Rigoletto was done was in the mid-'80s, and we did it again in '95. Well, when we came up with it in this past decade, I didn't want to present the same production, and then I realized in thinking about it that it is set in a normal fashion in Italy, in Mantua, and Italy, after all, the buildings haven't changed. They're exactly the same between the 14th century and today. So the buildings didn't have to change. We had to do something else. And the director had a wonderful idea, I think, in moving Rigoletto to Mussolini's time and creating the whole situation of having the Duke representing the fascist government, having Monterone, the father of the person who is so upset with the Duke and is so infurious what happens to his daughter, to have him a Jew and wearing a yarmulke, so that he was persecuted in the first act for this reason and in the third act. And it wasn't a tremendous change. It didn't have to change the plot in any way, but it was very popular and it worked extremely well. This just shows you in the first scene dancing around, and I mean it's hard to show on these slides some of the things, but it made the opera into something new that we hadn't had before, and yet worked in a way that people connected to. All of these others have come up in the last few years. In Falstaff is of course a wonderful opera. It can be very expensively done, but there's no reason not to take Falstaff back to its Shakespeare origins, to the play's origins. And we played the Falstaff on a Shakespearean stage. The artists, it was one of the interesting things about it was that at the beginning, the artists came on stage dressed in regular clothes 30 minutes before the opera was supposed to start. We suggested the audience come early. There was music being played that had nothing to do, in fact, music really from the 20s, had absolutely nothing to do with Falstaff, and they dressed in their Shakespearean costumes on stage. When they finished it, then we were able to start. The actors were there was as in Shakespeare, there was a circle around the stage of a platform, and the actors sat on the stage during the entire Falstaff, coming down to play as they did. It was people loved it. It was extremely successful, and it was an entirely different way of looking at it, but it also was very inexpensive. There was only one set. It never moved. It never changed. It didn't have to, and if you notice the cleverest thing in it, which I really loved, if you notice in the back, you see some chairs. Of course, in Falstaff, the big problem is always the last scene. What are you going to do with the oak? Because the oak has to be there. Well, the designer had this marvelous idea of putting together 400 chairs, in this order, in a shape that looked like a tree. And at the moment of that scene, the whole thing moved down, and nobody missed it. Absolutely nobody missed it. Everybody got it that it was a tree. They accepted it as a tree, and it was chairs, which we owned. So it really worked extremely well. Now, the next one I want to show you is what we did last spring. We decided to do an unusual opera, Massenet's Don Quixote, because I had the singers, or Don Quixote, that I wanted to do. And we could have rented a production for X amount of money, which was a standard production. We did rent costumes for it. We also made some of our costumes because we have a big costume shop, but we rented it. But the director, Lynn Dabrowski, had a wonderful idea that since Quixote, of course, comes from the novel, let's deal with it not in standard sets, but rather coming from books, because it comes that way. And you notice all these books on the stage that were all the books, they were labeled properly as the books, if you've read the Cervantes, that were the inspiration that Cervantes quotes again and again in the books that were supposed to have made Don Quixote angry. The only big expense we had was the horse and the donkey, because the books stayed on stage. They didn't move very much, but the horse and the donkey, animals always cost. But of course, audiences love animals, and these animals there was only once when one misbehaved in 8 performances. So we were very happy, but we were very proud of it. And that, I think, if I remember correctly, was the donkey. But at any rate, and so it was extraordinarily simple to do this, but the audience, it absolutely loved it. And also, there was a trick. We had a scrim that came down before each scene, because this opera, which is rarely done of Massenet, is in more or less scenes from Quixote. It doesn't try, of course, to do the whole novel. And on each scrim, we had a pertinent quote from the opera written, and then a picture, a drawing. Actually, they came from many years ago, drawings of Quixote, which indicated this particular scene. This was before each scene, which kind of set the mood for what was going on. All this was done at slightly less cost than renting the one production of this opera existed, which was the key to do it. And it really worked. We have another picture here from this, which was the way we did the windmills. And the windmills were, he was fighting. We had in place of windmills, we had huge inkwells, an enormous inkwell with a feather in it, and the feather could turn around. So it indicated that was like the windmill. And he went after them with his sword and then climbed up at the end on one of the books and looked as though he were going to jump off the book into the windmill, which John Relier, who was one of our Quixotes, really did it very well. Every night I was afraid he was really going to go because he was way up in the air to do it. But it was very exciting. People loved it, and it was wildly popular. I mean, this is not an opera that usually is particularly well sold because people don't know it and it's not all that popular. We sold it out, and people just loved it. It really was interesting, and we did it in the most inexpensive fashion we could. And finally, one other thing I want to show you. This was a production that we did of I Puritani some years ago, and you'll notice that it is all structured steel all around, and it turned out to be wonderful for a chorus. The chorus adored it because everybody could see them constantly. Each chorus member, they could be seen, and it worked very well acoustically in our theater. But it basically was just structural steel that created the scene for this opera, Puritani, about the Puritans in England. Now, it was successful. Well, then we were going to do Lucia. And since the important thing in both Puritani and Lucia is to make sure you have a staircase for the mad scenes involved, because for reasons that are known only, the reasons that don't make a lot of sense, on a mad scene, a soprano has to come downstairs. I don't know why, but I can tell you that has to happen. I didn't realize I had one right here looking at it. I don't have to look up. I can look here. At any rate, so we had all the stairs we wanted to do. So I thought with Lucia, let's just take what we have from Puritani and see if we can turn it into Lucia, which I was sure we could. And so we did. Now, you see, that's the way it looked. Now, we show the next one. And you see, you can't, it's too dark, it's a little dark, and you see, but we just rearranged the staircases, moved them slightly, used exactly the same sculpture, and absolutely nobody objected to it. Nobody seemed to realize that it was the same set they had seen, 3 years before. I think it was either 2 or 3 years before. And I intend to use this again, because I can move it, I can rearrange the sculpture in such a way that it really works. And this is the final scene from Lucia. This is the scene in the tomb at the end. But it worked, and it was very successful. And again, it was done at a very in an economic way. So I think that this is one of the ways we can do to be innovative. There are lots of things we have to do. I'm thrilled, incidentally, over this idea that you have about working with critics and building this up, because we lost our music critic in Seattle. We have a freelancer. A lot of things like this have happened everywhere, and it's so important. But the important thing is people, they have to know what they're talking about in order to do this. And unfortunately, a lot of what happens on the web are people who've just always wanted to write about opera but don't really know a thing about it except they're fans. That doesn't help. That's not criticism. But if we can teach, it's a wonderful, wonderful idea for the NEA to do. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff we're doing in Seattle, the kind of things, because it's very important to my board and to me to keep the Seattle Opera on a financial basis, on a solid financial basis. This is for every standpoint. It's easier to get donations that way. From every standpoint, it has to be done. And although this is increasingly difficult, we continue to do so, and all we can do each year is to pray that by the June 30th, we'll be there, and every year in opera, you start off with nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Speight. We wish we could clone you, and delighted to have you back here in Washington. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Beth Morrison, founder and general director of Beth Morrison Projects. Founded in 2006, Beth's organization identifies and supports the work of emerging and established composers and their multimedia collaborators through the commission, development, and production of their works. These presentations take the form of music theater, opera theater, and multimedia concerts. Beth represents the vibrant future of this incredible art form. She is fresh and engaging and has created an enterprise that is nimble. She's highly creative, adventuresome, and daring. Beth Morrison is clearly focused on bringing innovation to the world of opera. Beth?
Thank you, Wayne. It's truly an honor to be here with all of you and with Marc and Speight. To be able to speak on the same program is really an honor. Wayne called me and said, sort of out of the blue, and we didn't know each other, and said that he was interested in having me come to speak to you all today about the future of opera. And he sort of said that, and I went, gulp. Okay, I'll speak about the future of opera. Seems like a lot of pressure, but anyhow, here we go. So I'm a producer, which is a job title that doesn't really exist in our field in opera. Our chairman knows a thing or two about being a producer, and I guess I just must have to say, as an aside, your Angels in America was a pivotal theatrical experience for me in my youth. So. My background is as an artist. I did a Bachelor and a Master of Music degrees in vocal performance. I spent a little time as a professional singer and then began working at the Boston University Tanglewood Institute, ultimately as its director, before returning to school at the Yale School of Drama, something else we share, to pursue an MFA in theater management and producing under the mentorship of the late Benjamin Mordecai. I went back to school to specifically with the goal of starting my own company, and I wrote my business plan while I was there. People always ask me, what is a producer? There are dozens of different kinds of producers. I consider myself a creative producer, and specifically a creative producer of living composers' works. I work in a number of different ways. I commission, I develop, produce, and tour works. Any given project could be at any stage of that trajectory when I get involved. I build artistic teams, fundraise endlessly, provide all financial oversight, often function as the PR agent, secure contracts and venues, create all marketing materials, plot tours, and above all, work with the lead artists to create and fulfill the mission of the project. Because I work with emerging writers very often, I am also a de facto manager, advising them on career trajectories and giving counsel as requested. This is a 24/7 job. Beth Morrison Projects was founded in 2006 when I moved to New York City with a vision to produce theatrical works by living composers. I'm a producer without a home, so I partner with venues and presenters to keep costs low and to bring works to the stage. These venues take many forms. I produce opera and other works in club environments. So in New York, specifically, Le Poisson Rouge and Galapagos are two clubs that do this kind of work. I produce in black boxes downtown in New York, The Kitchen, PS 122, here Art Center. I also produce on large stages. I have 2 shows coming up this month at Brooklyn Academy of Music for the Next Wave Festival. I've produced at Lincoln Center, and internationally at the Barbican and other places around the globe. The first composer that I produced was Nico Muhly, and he was 23 at the time and very much pre-famous. Of course, Nico has gone on to be the star of his generation, being commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera. His opera, Two Boys, will be at the Met in 2013, just as he turns 30. Nico is a longtime collaborator, and we typically do 1 or 2 projects a year together. The other emerging composers that I have championed since the beginning of BMP have also gone on to become the leaders of their generation, including Missy Mazzoli, David T. Little, Paola Prestini, and others. I will produce premieres of all 3 of their operas this year. I've also started working with some of the stars in the field, including Philip Glass, a former opera honoree, David Lang, as well as Todd Mackover and Zhou Long, who won the Pulitzer this year for his opera Madame Whitesnake, which I tour. This year I will produce 7 world premieres, a international tour of Philip Glass's work, and 3 developmental workshops for next season's premieres. I was struck and moved by what Robert Ward said last night about Julius Rudel and the support that he gave Robert for the creation of the Crucible. Every artist needs an impresario to promote, support, and believe in them. I work to do that every day. Advocacy for the new work that is being created in New York by this extraordinary generation of young composers has become one of my great missions and passions in life. And I feel it's appropriate to give you a sense of what this music sounds like and looks like. And in my humble opinion, this really is the future of opera. So here we go. So what movement in new music am I talking about? There is a movement afoot in New York that is ripe and ready to move into the rest of the country. Composers in their 20s and 30s are creating a new musical language. It's the first true movement in music of the 21st century. This language is inclusive rather than exclusive. A new notion of contemporary music is being created. 21st century music is not difficult for audiences to listen to. It's melodic and it's accessible. Audience members who don't like classical music or opera can be drawn in. So what is post-classical or indie classical or the New York school? These are all phrases coined by New York Times and Time Out New York journalist and critic Steve Smith, a real friend to the movement, that are now being used in the industry and by journalists in a widespread way. The New York school is meant to describe the new language that is being created by the younger and emerging generation of composers educated in the classical tradition. This musical language is inclusive of all the influences that they have grown up with, including rock and roll, metal, folk, jazz, etc. But it's being done in such an organic way that it doesn't feel put on or gimmicky. One thing that is particularly exciting is that there's an explosion of contemporary opera and music theater that's being created. The marriage of music and drama historically has been something composers tackled mid-career. is complex and it's difficult to craft to master, and it's also time-consuming and expensive. Mid-career artists generally have producers and presenters supporting their work, having built up those contacts for a lifetime. Music, theater, and opera seems to be something that has become very much in fashion for this younger generation of composers, and I believe we really are in a second golden age of creation of the art form. Composers in their 20s and 30s are coming to the art form in droves. There's an explosion of chamber operas that are being created. Music theater and opera theater is poised to be the most exciting live arts medium in the 21st century, embodying a modern-day notion of Wagner's Gesamtkunstwerk. I just want to say that a lot of these composers, because they don't have producers and venues supporting them, are doing this themselves. They're doing the DIY model of producing, and it's happening in churches, it's happening in clubs, and they're making it happen. I think that's the most important thing to take away, is it's being done. So what does this post-classical music opera sound like? Juxtaposing traditional classical instruments, soundscapes, and composition techniques with modern-day ones, such as the use of electric guitar and rock progressions, which give an immediacy and contemporary aesthetic to the music, all the while being truly classical in the contemporary classical sense. So I'm going to just give you, we're going to do some listening now. I'm going to just give you some examples of some of this work that is being created by some of these leaders in the field. So first off is Missy Mazzoli's Song from the Uproar. I'll just let this play for a bit. Okay, so that gives you a little sense of that. Missy is one of the very, very prominent figures in her generation, and I'm really thrilled to be producing the world premiere of her opera at the Kitchen in February. Okay, I have a couple more. So what does this post-classical opera sound like? Here again, influences from rock, pop, jazz, musical theater are clearly heard in this new musical language. I'm going to show you a 2-minute clip here which is a trailer from David Little's opera Soldier Songs, which is a one-man opera that takes its libretto from interviews from veterans of 5 wars. And we just did this at the International Festival of Arts and Ideas in June. And this is with his band, Newspeak.
Someone yell cut, I don't know what to do. Someone yell cut, something has gone terribly wrong. Someone yell cut, this movie's out of control. This movie's out of control, where's the director? Someone yell cut, this romance has got to end. And
Okay, so we built this work through workshop process in 2008 at Le Poisson Rouge in New York, and then we finally had the world premiere this past June. This trailer that we've just put together is the beginning of how I'm going to now start pitching this piece around the country to venues, and we hope to take it lots of places. Okay, the next one I want to play a little bit of is by Paolo Prestini, an incredible Italian-American composer who does an extraordinary job of bringing in world music influences of her heritage into her work. And this was workshopped at Carnegie Hall as well as Vox by City Opera. And I'm doing the world premiere of it at the Kennedy Center and then up at the River to River Festival in New York. So Paolo's work is scored for instrumental ensemble of 9 or full orchestra, children's choir, adult choir, and 4 soloists. One that you heard at the beginning, the extraordinary Helga Davis, who's a jazz improvisateur, a beautiful Grammy award-winning soprano, Gila Plitman, classical baritone, Kris Burchett, and an incredible folk artist from Italy, Claudia Primo. Okay, so who's writing contemporary opera? Well, pretty much everybody. This is just to show you a little bit of David Lang's The Difficulty of Crossing a Field, a piece that we're going to remount in 2013. It's extraordinary production by Bob McGrath and by Bill Morrison and Jim Finley. And as you can see from the set, it's almost feels otherworldly. It's just really incredible. And finally, this is Madame Whitesnake, which is by Zhou Long. I toured this piece. We took it to Beijing Music Festival last year. We're going to go back to China, to Hangzhou. Zhou Long won the Pulitzer for this year, which was very exciting. So that's a little bit about what I'm up to. Thank you so much for having the opportunity to talk about what I love.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Council, I believe you can witness the fact that opera is robust. Delighted to respond to any questions or observations by members of the Council at this time.
I enjoyed the opera honors last night, and the Seattle Opera. And what I took away was that at age 6, you were influenced in I'm sorry. I was at the Opera Awards last night, and what I took away was that at age 6 you were influenced by opera, and at age 10 you knew that you wanted to work in opera. And I look at my experience. My mother, I grew up painting in her studio, Saturday mornings listening to Texaco. And I listened to all sorts of music, but I have a huge stack of opera CDs that I listen to when I work. And I think that also goes into what Rocco talks about with theaters, the importance of some sort of a connection growing up, that you never know. Probably everyone in this room has had something that made them become the artists that they are, and the importance of being out there and having it accessible.
I agree. I mean, I think this is right. It's what I said last night, is that I think that the important thing of getting, we work very hard to get children, young people into opera, because if we get young people coming to opera, and particularly we do a lot of work with junior high and high school, you know, we may lose them later, you know, when they start out and they have hard jobs and they just have children, but they'll come back to us because it's the influence at the beginning. And of course, I think everybody my age, I mean, I would say 95% of the people my age who are opera lovers started with the Texaco broadcast from the Metropolitan Opera. I mean, that was where you heard it. So this business at the beginning is so important to do, and that's why we educate. We have the largest education program in Seattle for kids in schools everywhere, just constantly working. We do 55 lectures before we do any opera, whether it's Bohème or whether it's Don Quixote. I mean, so there's a lot of that stuff.
I certainly agree with what Speight said. When I go around to boards of directors, and I speak with boards around the country frequently, I always start my workshops by asking people to tell me who brought them to their first opera. And more than half of the adults I talk to as trustees of opera companies discovered opera as adults. That they went with someone they were dating, went with a business associate, that there was a corporate event. And even though I think it is so important to imprint a young person with a love for the arts, I don't think that in missing that opportunity we should give up on the opportunity to bring them into the theaters of whatever our art form is as adults, because plenty of adults also discover the magic of the arts even when they are out of school and in their professions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can always convert. I mean, that's the whole point. If you do good work, people come because they want to see theater, and they want to see music theater, and I mean, you know, in my humble way, I believe we can move people as much, if not more, than any other kind of theater, because we combine everything together. And so I think that's what our job is. That's what we do.
Beth, I didn't realize we held these points of intersection as both producing and at the Yale School of Drama. But I noticed Robert Woodruff's name there, and I recently saw an opera at the City Opera, Seance on a Wet Afternoon, written by a theater composer, Stephen Schwartz. And I noticed what Peter Gelb has been doing at the Met, hiring theater directors. Is this something that I'm just discovering and coming to, or is this a trend that is gaining increasing momentum to emphasize the dramatic elements of the opera and to bring in theater professionals to work there?
I'm not sure that my mic is working. Oh, maybe it is. Okay.
You got it.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Seance was Seance was not working. Seance was designed by my ex-wife.
Oh, fantastic. I know that Peter Gelb, at the sort of top of the field, when he came in, made it a mission to bring theater and film directors to opera. I certainly know on the level that I'm working, it's extremely important to me to bring theater directors to opera, because I think the more vital the theater is in opera, the more people that we will reach. And I'm working actually with Robert on several projects right now, him being just one of the most extraordinary directors that we have.
Excuse me, but this business of Mr. Gelb, I mean, Peter, talking about bringing in theater directors, we've been doing that in opera for as long as I can remember. I mean, Margaret Webster, Mr. Bing's first performance at the Met in 1950 was Don Carlo, which Margaret Webster came in and staged. Alfred Lunt staged Così fan tutte the second year. I mean, you know, in other words, we've been having theater directors in opera since the beginning of my life in opera. So it's nice to have them, but there's several things about theater directors you got to be careful about. How do we differ? How do we in opera differ from the theater? There's one big respect, not just the music, but choruses. And many theater directors are scared to death of choruses and can't work with them. And if a theater director gives a chorus to an assistant director, he or she shouldn't be doing the job. Because the choruses are what are fun in opera to work with as a thing, and that's different. So there's a whole lot of things. Some theater directors can do it, and others can't.
I think there's also another danger that I've run into with theater directors, which I consider just an education issue, and I try to work to educate as I work with them. Working with singers is really very different than working with actors, because there's music, and they have to know the notes, and they have to know the rhythm, and the music has to be together. And I've been in situations where we all work with monitors, and if the monitors aren't working and there's a delay and musically things are falling apart, and the theater director is saying, "We don't have time to fix this, we don't have time to fix this," and I'm standing there saying, if the music doesn't work, it doesn't matter what the lights look like, because the singers aren't going to sing. So there are those challenges, but I think it's, clearly Speight's been doing this for longer than me.
It's always fun, but the fact is we say there are bar lines. You got to pay attention to the bar lines. I mean, they're there, and you got to live with them. So that they have to learn this. That's the thing that we are a musical art form, no matter what else, however much drama. And there got to be. I always say music is 51% and the drama is 49%. This is what I think, and I think that's what you got to look at.
Thank you. A brief question for Beth. To what degree do you think your aesthetic is influenced by the genre of music videos, which are also highly visual and include music?
That's a good question. I'm also a pop music junkie and start every morning at the gym watching VH1 music videos. So I think you might say highly influenced. I also think that the generation that I'm working with is extremely visual. And almost nothing is done. I don't do anything that doesn't have some visual element. So even when I'm doing a concert, there's always some visual element to it, even if it's just dramatic lighting.
I'd like to respond to that too. I think that visual is so important with the young people. I remember one instance that my daughter was dating a young man who'd never been to an opera, and he came to see Bohème. And he was sitting next to me. And at the end of the first two scenes, at the end of the Mamuse scene, I said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "I really don't know what to think. I've never been hit by so many stimuli at one time, hitting at one thing." And I think that's why we say that one of the reasons we work with young people as well as we do is because the MTV generation has this stimulus hitting you from, and that's what we do in opera. So I think it really is, it's a big thing for all of us.
I'm just wondering, because I'm a theater guy, when each of you are presented with the opportunity to create a new work, what kind of criteria do you use to decide, why is The Merry Wives of Windsor worthy of an opera where another Shakespeare play wouldn't be? What do you put through your minds to say, this could be an opera, this will never be an opera?
Do you want to start? I haven't gone that way in doing a new work. What I've gone is talking to the composer and saying, what are you interested in? What do you care about? What means to you? And then if the composer comes back and gives me an opera we did, we commissioned a big opera 2 years ago, and we spent, the composer and I wanted the composer because I knew his work. And we spent a lot, 6 months, 9 months before we ever came up with a subject that I thought, yeah, that's good, let's see. And then he has to find the way I think it's right, he finds the librettist. And it's such a complicated, huge project, but I don't ever suggest, I never, and I'm a producer, I consider myself a producer too, and I wouldn't suggest any Shakespeare, I wouldn't suggest anything to a composer, because he's got to be stimulated by the words. Oh yes, it comes from them, and and then I'm the one that has to say I want it or I don't want it.
And why would you want it? Why wouldn't we want it? Just individual.
Yeah, it's.
Do you see a trend of things you don't want as opposed to things that?
No, I think Beth. I think one thing. I don't know whether I'd be interested to know if you agree with this, but I believe the reason I think an opera company. She's a producer. She runs her place. I do too. Opera is, in symphony these days, in symphony and in theater, you often have two heads. You have a managing director and you have a artistic director, whatever you do. Opera has always worked with one person working it because the taste of an opera company leader, of a general director, is what governs the company. If the public likes his or her taste, you work. If they don't, you should be out. In other words, but it is your taste. It is my taste that has to govern what Seattle Opera does. And I have no hesitation about that at all.
It's very subjective, and I agree with Speight. I actually have gone to a composer with a suggestion for a project, and I'll say that in a minute. But it is very much about what does the composer want to be doing, or the librettist, or the team. And I'm fond of saying, what's the crazy idea that you think nobody else is going to produce?
Exactly.
And that will tend to tease out some really very exciting projects that will come out of that. I did have in one instance where I commissioned a song cycle from Kamla Sankaram, who's an Indian American composer, and I really was moved by this play on the story of Mukhtar Mai, who's an extraordinary now a women's rights activist in Pakistan, and Kamla seemed like exactly the right person to write this because of her background, and so she got really excited about it. She did the song cycle for a concert I produced in 2009 called the 21C Liederabend, and then after that she came to me and said, well, I kind of want to make this a larger piece. And I said, great, look at this playwright who wrote this incredible play on this woman, and they got together and they fell in love with each other artistically, and they're writing the opera, which we're going to now do at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, actually.
This is probably a stupid lay comment, but I think of opera as heightened emotion. I think if you're embarrassed by emotion, you don't like opera.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, the source material, I would think, would have a certain size. Falstaff has size. Don Giovanni has size. And I would think that would be an attraction to opera people more than other dramatic sources.
Well, may I say what? No, I've always said there are only three things that you need to have to like opera. One is you have to like hearing people sing. Another thing, you have to like the sound of the human voice. And the third thing is you can't be afraid of passion, because we are passion. That's what we're dealing with, passion, emotion. But I think that this thing was, when this composer, Darren Hagen, I was working with him, he was coming up with interesting ideas, but they were kind of small. And when he finally said to me, what about doing something about Vietnam? And I said, wonderful, because it's so big, nobody's done it, I don't know where we're going to go with it, but I think that's a great idea, because I wanted something. Anyway, there's a whole lot of things I wanted connected with the Northwest and everything, but, but I think you take a big idea and you break it down, but we do deal with big ideas.
Beth.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, just had a quick follow-up. It's fantastic work that you're doing. Can you just speak briefly to what you're experiencing in terms of audiences? My sense, of course, is that your audience and what you're seeing is different than traditional opera. And do you see any trend where what you're doing is helping to expand the breadth of audiences that might go to traditional opera, or that this will be the permanent kind of new audience, but they require the new direction that you're taking opera in? If you can speak
for sure. My pieces tend to draw audiences from all demographics. Of course, the venue prescribes a lot of that. So if I'm at a downtown venue and a club, it's going to be a really young audience. But I also work to bring the Upper West Side crowd down to the downtown clubs as well, and so I've had success with that as well. It's been really gratifying to have people come up to me that are in their 20s and say, God, I didn't think I liked classical music. I certainly didn't think I liked opera, but I really get this, and this really speaks to me. And I think that's because what my presentation was really going for, which is having these very contemporary sounds in the music. It means something to them, and they understand it, and it feels like it's of them and for them, as opposed to being something so removed from the 19th century.
And I would just want to add that I think the notion of a monolithic opera audience is a notion of the past, that there are now multiple audiences for different kinds of opera. And the audience that Beth is developing for her work may or may not go up to Lincoln Center, and I don't care. The fact that they are enjoying a kind of opera in Beth's venues and another audience is enjoying Speight's opera in his venue, that's great for the art form, that there are these different kinds of opera and different kinds of opera audiences.
Yeah, I think we don't have. I think that our audience may not go as much to yours, but your audience will eventually come to ours because they hear good singing and they hear music and they're going to want to do it. They get exposed, and I think that's why it's a wonderful cross-pollination between the two.
But I want the people that go to your opera to come to mine too.
I know. I'd be happy for them too.
And on that note, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
If I walk out at 11:15, I'm not walking out in protest. I have a plane to catch, and I know Frank and maybe some of our council members are on a tight schedule too. So we'll run it as fast as we can, as long as we can. But then I think we're going to have to wrap it up, or else turn it over to Patrice. So Wayne, thanks, and let's have a round of applause and thanks for our three panelists. For those of us who are not as knowledgeable as we should be in this field, it was great hearing from all three of you. It was fantastic. Thanks. I'd like now to turn to the NEA research portfolio. Since the June meeting, the NEA has released research on artist employment projections through 2018 and on the net value added by this country's cultural industries. Both of these reports are available on arts.gov. In addition, we also announced the NEA's first ever research grants. Our Office of Research and Analysis announced the availability of grants to conduct research into the value and impact of the U.S. arts sector on the nation, whether on individuals or communities. We are interested in novel and significant research questions that will lead to greater public understanding of the contribution of the arts. Grantees may use either existing or newly established data sets to conduct their research, including longitudinal databases of early childhood and high school education, National Center for Education Statistics, U.S. Department of Education, American Community Survey, U.S. Census Bureau, Current Population Survey and related supplements, U.S. Census Bureau, American Time Use Survey, Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. Department of Labor, and the Cultural Data Project, the Pew Charitable Trusts. Complete information is available on arts.gov, and the deadline is coming up in about a week. I'm very excited to see what research projects will come in under these grants. Today, we are excited to be releasing new research on artists in the workforce that takes a look at the 2.1 million artists working in the United States and provides new industry-specific regional and demographic data. Bonnie Nichols, are we still going to do that? Yes, okay. I would like to invite up Bonnie Nichols from our Office of Research and Analysis. Bonnie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Office of Research and Analysis is very pleased to announce a new research report, Artists and Art Workers in the United States. As of this morning, the report is up on the endowment's website at arts.gov, and it's full of new and richly nuanced information about America's labor force of artists and art workers. This morning I'll talk about just a few of those findings. The Office of Research has taken a historic interest in tracking artists' employment across the U.S. from decade to decade. Over the period that we are studying, 2000 to 2009, the artist labor force increased by 5%, or a little less than the 8% growth in the overall labor force. You'll notice in this graph the downturn in 2009. In that year, the artist labor force contracted 1.3%, marking the beginning of the visible toll that the economic recession has taken on artists. With our new report, we are expanding our purview of artists beyond employment data to embark on new demographic details and a host of variables describing their specific work patterns. We are also, for the first time, pinpointing employment in arts industries so we can get a clearer picture of the nation's arts sector as a whole.
The study draws from two large federal data sources, the American Community Survey, which permits detailed demographic profiling of artists, as well as an understanding of their work patterns. This is the first time our office is tapping the American Community Survey since it became fully operational in 2005. We also draw from the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages, which provides a virtual census of workers by industry, including arts organizations and businesses. We define artists by the following 11 artist occupations, ranging from performing artists such as actors, musicians, and dancers. The musicians category includes opera singers. And to non-performing artists such as architects, designers, writers, and authors. In the United States, there are now 2.1 million artists tallied as people who work the most number of hours per week in an artist occupation. And to help put that in context, we have sometimes compared that figure to the number of armed forces, which totals 1.4 million. So artists exceed the armed forces by about 700,000 workers. Of our artists, almost 40%, or over 800,000, are designers. Although the report provides a breakdown of performing artists by individual artist occupation, here we have added them up to show that performing artists are 17% of the artist workforce. Other significant artist occupations include architects and fine artists or visual artists, each forming 10% of the artist labor force. As a side note about the fine arts occupation, we refer to this as fine artists, art directors, and animators, but it also includes other visual artists such as painters, sculptors, and multimedia artists. Most artists work for the private, for-profit sector. Many artists, however, are entrepreneurial in that 34% are self-employed. Among all workers, by contrast, less than 10% are self-employed. The percentage self-employed is particularly great among our fine artists and among writers and authors at 44%. The survey also reveals that artists work not only in the performing arts and movie industries, but also in industries that may not come to mind initially when we think of artists. For example, 53% of musicians work in the performing arts industry, perhaps no surprise there, but 35% work for religious organizations, such as church organists, and nearly 2%, or more than 3,000 musicians, are in the military, mostly Army and the Marines. The designer occupation is broad and includes industrial designers, interior designers, fashion and floral designers, and set designers. Consequently, designers work in a number of industries, including, of course, design services, which would include industrial design firms and fashion houses, but also in industries such as retail, trade, and manufacturing. The report covers a variety of demographic trends, including age, minority, race, and ethnicity, and marital status and immigration status. But for a moment, I'd like to concentrate on just one variable, education. Artists are generally more educated than the U.S. workforce at large. Almost 60% of artists hold a bachelor's degree or higher level of training. Among all workers, that share is 32%. Architects and writers and authors report the highest levels of college training. More than 80% of artists in both occupations hold bachelor's degrees or higher levels of training. Dancers, announcers, and entertainers are less likely to be college educated. Education, in turn, is correlated with earnings. For example, architects are also the best paid artists. Dancers and entertainers are among the lowest paid artists. The research report includes much more detail about the wages and salaries of artists. Another interesting finding new to this analysis is that nearly 1 out of 10 college-educated workers has majored in an arts-related field. And I want to point out that this figure refers to the U.S. workforce, not just artists. So nearly 10% of the college-educated workforce majored in an arts-related field. Our report goes into quite a bit of depth about the kinds of college majors most commonly associated with specific artist jobs. Okay, so we know that there are 2.1 million artists, but where are they? This map shows concentrations of artists by state. For example, artists as a percentage of the total workforce exceed the national average by 50 to 60% in New York and California, and by 20% in Vermont and Oregon. Also reported here for the first time are location quotients derived from the quarterly census of employment and wages. As a side note, the location quotients measure employment in a particular industry relative to total employment for a particular area, say a state or metro area. We then compare that result to the U.S. average. For example, employment in Minnesota's book publishing industry is more than 5 times greater than the U.S. average. Employment in the book publishing industry is 80% above average in Indiana and 20% above average in Kansas. Tennessee leads the nation in musical instrument manufacturing, but employment in this industry is also above average in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. At the metro level, as perhaps expected, employment in theater companies is 3 times the national average in the greater New York City area, but it is also 50% greater in the Baltimore area as well. These figures are reported for metro areas, not cities per se. Metro areas consist of the central city hub, plus the adjacent counties determined by the Office of Management and Budget to be economically and socially related. The San Jose area is the leader in industrial design. Employment is 3 to 4 times greater than the national average. But I also point your attention to the the Cincinnati figure here. It's 2.5 times greater than the national average employment in industrial design. And I recently came across a newspaper article from a local Cincinnati newspaper that interviewed one of the professors at the University of Cincinnati. And in the newspaper article, the professor said, no one outside of Ohio knows that Ohio is such a strong concentration of design. These figures bear out the professor's statement, and we hope that more people will now know that about Ohio. These are just a few of the highlights from this report. In recent months alone, the NEA's Office of Research has dedicated more time and resources in acquiring and tabulating large data sets such as the one discussed today, so that we can provide a comprehensive picture of the U.S. arts sector. As we go forward, we will be looking into new ways to enhance these data and make it relevant for researchers, policymakers, and the American public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. I'd now like to invite our guests from FoydFest to join us here at the podium. Thank you so much. We're going to be talking about festivals.
We can make this quick. And regrettably, none of our 10 stages at FoydFest currently feature opera, but after our 2 days here, we might have to consider that.
We may just come. So yes, thank you. It's a great honor, and let's give it up for art and art in general. It's a wonderful thing. I've loved it my entire life, and it's been a long journey from the Appalachian Hills here to Washington, D.C., so thank you. It takes teamwork or a community to make the dream work, and we're lucky enough to live in such a community. And with the right ingredients, we know that makes things taste very well. And Floyd plus Fest equals FoydFest. So Lovers Rock in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I don't have the clicker up here, so if we can go to the next. Thank you. Yes, this is an aerial of our beautiful 80-acre site off the Blue Ridge Parkway, mile marker 170.5. Thank you. Here at the past July at capacity crowd, which is 14,500 or 15,000 per day over the 4 days.
A key in creative placemaking, as with much in life, is to work with the ingredients you have. We were fortunate in our own endeavor in that Floyd was already a cool place, an existing arts community in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Floyd is naturally well endowed, with scenic beauty, clean air, water, rich soil, a fertility which lends itself to the cultural fertility. Floyd is a one-stoplight town. Only 14,000 people, the majority of whom fall into these categories. So there's an existing climate of support for artistic out-of-the-box endeavors. This is Floyd County as seen from the backstage of our festival site.
Yes, and Floyd County, of course, is beautiful in its geographic location, but just as well, it's the spirit of community that exists that is very intriguing and special about Floyd. I came to Floyd and was attracted to Floyd because of the critical mass of creative thinkers and doers that already existed in the community, so it lent itself to putting on a large-scale international festival like FoydFest that seems to defy the economic conditions of our current day by growing 18 to 30% a year. As Erika mentioned, there's already an existing cool, and in fact we coined a bumper sticker a few years ago, you can't buy cool, when it exists it's real and people respond to it, and it's the spirit of the community that supports that. It's a really special place. Here's our Dreaming Creek main stage. This is an example of the spirit of our community. We were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Yes, we considered the monetary aspects secondary to the artistic aspects of making sure that this community event existed. And Dreaming Creek timber framers out of Floyd County decided to build this stage for us in year 3 as a testament to that shared vision.
Given its comparatively remote location, many in Floyd have a long history of sustaining and supporting themselves, and the community generally is supportive of new localized endeavors, especially those that contribute to the shared pride of place that we all feel about Floyd. So it was in this context and climate of an organic, accepting business environment that Kris and I embarked on our first startup business, which was to serve as a springboard for our larger festival effort. We opened a small downtown restaurant called, fittingly, Oddfellas. This is the gates into our festival site, our colorful crowd of 15,000 a day coming through. A local young Floyd artist did the sculpture you see there.
Now art's an interesting thing. It'll exist, I've always believed, whether there's money behind it or not. I mean, people will always be artists. Yes, it helps to sustain and support the massive endeavors of presenting the art. When we started this crazy dream in Floyd, we had a small stage in Oddfellas Cantina that hosted national, local, regional, international musicians from around the world, as well as the sustainable aspects of local agriculture and the food in the town. So, you know, if you can see it, you can be it. And once you have the vision, I know a lot of you understand the power of vision, and you understand when you see it, the obstacles that are going to be coming after that will be overcome. So we're really proud that Oddfellas Cantina showcased that there was a demand. We nurtured that demand, and the festival movement at the same time was happening across the country, and the music and arts festival movement in the country is the strongest facet of entertainment business today. And there's different styles of music and art festivals. When you throw an event named after your community, you have to represent, and I think people are responding to that authenticity, that quality, and that sincerity. This is one of our stages. We have 10 stages. We present over 145 performers over the 4 days, which is a production nightmare at times, but we pull it off with a strong team of qualified people out of the community. And this is the Streamlined Stage at Hill Holler, another timber frame structure at sunset during FoydFest.
So from its inception, we knew we wanted FoydFest to be more than just a one or even multiple day concert, and we intentionally created a nonprofit arm, Blue Cow Arts. BCA has helped us bridge the gap not just between Africa and Appalachia, but between the town of Floyd itself and the festival, engaging a multitude of local and state nonprofits, as well as supporting local, regional, and international roots musicians. Some of our most notable work in this realm has been done in conjunction with the Virginia Folklife Program, which sponsors a dedicated workshop porch on the festival site. Another view of the festival site, Treble Clef, which we light up at night. This is an 80-acre venue. Music, magic, and mountains.
I know I'm guilty of this, but I think most people are. They're searching for something magical. They want to be inspired. They want to connect with life and each other. I think music is a wonderful way to do that. The love of music, I think, exists and permeates throughout this room, I'm sure. And coupled with the environmental awareness that has piqued an interest in experiencing a more natural, rural environment, Floyd presented and gave us that perfect backdrop to do it. It's kind of a clean canvas upon which to paint. It wasn't already, stuck in any formal kind of way. It was like it's a one-stoplight town. So it really lends itself to having a clean canvas to paint on. Here's another view of our main stage and another sculpture from a local artist, and we care about every detail from every color to every light to every presentation throughout the festival grounds. Again, we have 10 stages, and not only are there performances on the stages itself, but the sculptures, the landscaping, the roaming performers, the trapeze artists, the list goes on and on.
If so far we've made any of this sound easy, I want to back up and say that it has not been at all. We've weathered hurricanes, battled the inevitable pessimistic naysayers, trudged through years of ridiculous individually held debt. However, I stand here saying that we would not trade the experience of hard-earned success for the windfall of an overnight success. The belief that Kris and I had and have in our shared vision of FoydFest and our will to see that come to fruition, backed by a team of people who shared that spirit and that belief in the importance of bringing people together in an environment and for an experience like FoydFest, has brought us to where we are today. This picture being representative of where we are today, a crowd of 15,000 people for Lee Von Helm in front of our main stage.
Growth and recognition. It's interesting, I think Floyd represents the fierce, independent spirit of artists, and it's a wonderful community for that. And in saying that, we have always been an anti-hype kind of presentation with music. We do present some popular music, but it's kind of under the radar because we want to connect people, educate people on music, and not just spoon-feed them. And we want to connect with people whether you're 5 years old or 100 years old. That's kind of the all-inclusive idea behind a community and representative of FoydFest itself. Like I mentioned earlier, we've had a strong annual increase of 18 to 30% throughout the 10 years. We've never seen a backwards motion in that. And it's the authentic Floyd community lifestyle brand that is transforming the world because it's natural, it's not forced, sustainable and profitable, with social awareness and the stewardship thereof at the core. Here is a beautiful rainbow over the stage, signifying that dreams do come true somewhere over the rainbow.
So our vision was to create a uniquely holistic music festival experience, one which represented the many unique characteristics of our hometown and its namesake, Floyd, Virginia. We've stuck to this vision, and it's embodied in our family-friendly atmosphere, our uniquely varied musical lineup, the inclusion of panel speakers and educators throughout the festival, the artistic beauty of our locally contributed timber-framed architecture and landscaping, and really our effort at an overall attention to every single detail of the experience. This one really needs no words.
Commitment to sustainability. When the word sustainability is interesting. How do you sustain one's life healthfully? How do you do a community? Well, you make choices that develop positive effects in your own life as well as your relationships. So we've really tried to sustain ourselves by connecting with the audience. We've never gone overboard with our ticket sales for the mere sake of profit. We want the experience, the quality of the experience to be the number one goal, and people are really responding to it. I think more and more people are needing, they're wanting that across the nation, and we're lucky once again to be in Floyd that supports such a notion. So like I said, it's not necessarily been economic development, has not been behind our reason for doing this festival at all. It's merely to showcase the wonderful aspects of what a community can be and how art and music can represent that. It's always been at the core, and staying true to the community is what we're all about, and that's FoydFest for you. And I'd like to thank you very much for listening to our story. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Kris Hodges and Erika Johnson from FoydFest, for bringing the festival home to us. It was fabulous. Thank you. And today's session has been all about producers of all kinds, so that was fantastic. I'm taking over for Rocco here, who had to go, and we have one final piece of business, and that is to announce that the National Council on the Arts has reviewed the applications and guidelines presented to them, and a tally of the council members' ballots reveals that all recommendations for funding and rejection have passed. So thank you, council members. And on Rocco's behalf and my own behalf as well, I'd like to thank the entire NEA staff for all of the hard work and dedication that went into preparing for the past day and a half of council meetings and for everything that you all do. We're incredibly proud to lead this agency and incredibly lucky to know this group of dedicated public servants. Now I get to do something I've always wanted to do, but Rocco always does. The 174th meeting of the National Council on the Arts is now adjourned. See you in March.